We started last week, and we'll go to the second chapter this week. So I just wanted to go over a couple of points from last week's chapter, and then apply some thought to some of the things in the second chapter. The first chapter tells us Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai Umisora Yeshua. Moses received the Torah on Sinai. From whom? From God. And then proceeded to give it over entirely to Joshua. Then it says Joshua to the elders to the prophets. Then it says the prophets transmitted it to the men of the Great Assembly. The language here is very difficult, because if the prophets transmitted it to the men of the Great Assembly, why doesn't it say that the elders transmitted it to the prophets? And why doesn't it say Joshua transmitted it to the elders? Something's missing there. Why does it suddenly appear that the prophets transmitted the Torah in its entirety to the men of the Great Assembly, not before? And an answer to this question is found in the writings of one of the greatest minds of the late 17th, early 18th century, Rabbi Jonathan Eibschitz, who says in a very small, not so popular book, that it was only Moses who got the whole Torah, and he was the only one who knew the whole Torah. And he gave the whole Torah over to Joshua. Not just the written law, but all the halachas, all of the oral law. But immediately, as soon as Moses dies, doubts erupted, and people forgot. It says that Joshua forgot 3,000 laws during the days of the mourning of Moses, and had to be reconstructed by Othniel, son of Kenaz. And even though it was reconstructed, it still was not a Masorah, it still was not a transmission. It was how we solved the questions, but not an oral transmission. And so Joshua could not give over the Torah entirely to the elders, nor could the elders give the entire Torah to the prophets. So how is it that the prophets gave over the entire Torah to the men of the Great Assembly? Rabbi Eibschitz concludes as follows. What each generation did was they gave over what they heard exactly as they heard it. And because they gave it over exactly as they heard it, the Torah has the ability to reconstruct itself. Not necessarily in each generation, but by a clear, dispassionate, and intense and devout examination of the words of the Torah, and one would be able to reconstruct all the other laws, even if one had sketchy information, but that information was the words of the Torah itself. For the Torah has within it the elements of its own reconstruction. Why couldn't it be done before? Because they didn't need it as much. Jewish life continued based upon precedent. There was not a great need to know the exact nuances of all of the laws. But when the men of the Great Assembly came, they had to reconstruct Jewish law. People didn't know what they were supposed to do. People didn't even know how to speak a common language. they were like the people who spoke Pidgin, you know, in the South Pacific. Combination of English and Dutch and some other languages. And that's what people did. They had a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and they couldn't speak a regular language. They couldn't speak the language. They certainly didn't know the laws. They were ignorant. Tremendous amount of assimilation. Jewish men marrying non-Jewish women. And all of this was very disturbing to the men of the Great Assembly. They had to reconstruct Jewish life with people who were ignorant, who weren't following the rules properly, didn't know better. How could they give over something that they themselves had incomplete? And so they worked hard and examined what they received, and because of the merit of the public, they were able to give over what they received exactly. And that's why the Mishnah says, they gave it over. Because by giving what you hear, honestly, even though you're defective, even though your reception may be defective, but you give the language over, you express the experience, you try to make the point, all of that, since it's Torah, is able to be reconstructed at the end. There's a lesson here from Pirkei Avos. We live at a time where everything's loosey-goosey. Everything goes. The worst perpetrators are parents allowing kids to be totally self-indulgent, to have no sense of shame for their bodies. And as a result of that, the morals of this generation are decidedly, radically different than they're supposed to be according to the Jewish law. One needs to protest. So one could say, how can I protest? I'll be called a hypocrite. I was doing the same thing when I was a kid. Or, until now, I was just the same as anybody else. How can I go ahead and tell people to live differently? Let me show you a picture of something. This man here, take a look at him. Nice looking man with a beard. He's a former NFL linesman for the Dallas Cowboys. Won the Super Bowl in 1993. Alan Weingrand. Former Super Bowl winner. Goes around the country today telling people materialism isn't what the purpose of life is. Having your flap, called your foreskin, isn't going to give you the pleasure necessary to have fulfillment for the entire life. It's all an empty shell. The only thing that counts is living with God, living a godly life. And every one of us has the ability to make a difference in young people's lives. By example, like this man, by our words, by our actions, by everything we have, by our money. People think that they can't influence their children. Sure they can. It's called the will, and it's very powerful. And besides the will, the happiness or the unhappiness of a parent can make a tremendous difference in the life of a child.